Hello and welcome to WION World is One. I'm Ghadi Francis and this is the West Asia Post, our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates and stories from this part of the world. Today, our top story is about the Gulf nations. Now, this part of West Asia has traditionally been a staunch ally of the United States of America. But recently, it looks like they're looking after their own self-interest. Now, the United Arab Emirates' Mohammed bin Zayed has visited Moscow, sat down with the President Vladimir Putin. This and much more changed about the policies of the Gulf nations. We bring you all the details about this in this report.
The Gulf nations have traditionally been staunch allies of the US. Who do we mean when we say Gulf nations? We're talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait. All of these West Asian nations are oil producers. They are part of the OPEC group. The US has a large military presence in the Gulf. That is because of a security for oil agreement between the US and the Gulf states. This tie-up is most visible in Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer. And why does the US have such an arrangement? Well, to secure its oil interests. But what about the interests of the oil producers? Do they always align with US needs? What happens when they don't? We are seeing that very scenario play out. As you know, earlier this month, the OPEC Plus group met in Vienna. OPEC Plus is the alliance of oil producers and other nations, including Russia. After the meeting, the group decided to cut oil production. That went directly against the wishes of the US. The US reaction was expected. Washington was furious. There were talks about stopping arms supplies to Riyadh. The US even released part of its strategic oil reserves on Wednesday.
Today I'm announcing 3 critical steps that my administration will take to reduce gas prices at the pump. First, the Department of Energy will release another 15 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, extending our previously announced release through the month of December.
This is because the Democratic Party needs fuel prices to go down. They are facing the midterm elections in a few weeks. They can't afford to anger the public with high fuel costs. Having known this, why did Gulf nations not keep production stable? Or why did they not at least wait for the elections to end? The Gulf nations have said the decision was not political.
The last decision was taken on the same approach. And I would like to reiterate that there is nothing political about any decision we take within OPEC.
Let's take a look at some of the recent diplomatic moves the Gulf states have made. Just days after the OPEC meeting, the UAE's President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed met Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. He became one of the small number of world leaders to visit Russia since the invasion of Ukraine. Days later, Putin met with Qatar's Emir Tamim bin Hamad in Kazakhstan. They held a face-to-face meeting on the sidelines of the CICA summit. Talks about Ukraine, trade and investment were on the agenda. They also discussed the upcoming Football World Cup in Qatar.
I would like to thank you, Mr. President. The success that Russia had during the 2018 World Cup is a big help in preparing for the World Cup that we will be hosting. We thank you for your cooperation in preparing for the upcoming tournament.
These meetings, combined with the oil cuts, what does it mean? Are the Gulf states realigning towards Russia? Not necessarily. While the moves are sure to have angered the US, they could just be acts of self-interest by the Gulf nations. US-Saudi Arabia ties have been cold since Joe Biden became president. Remember, Biden had promised to make the kingdom a pariah in the run-up to his election. He said he would hold Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to account for the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Perhaps the Gulf nations are not realigning away from the US, but from the Democratic Party. Saudi Arabia did share good ties with former President Donald Trump after all. For now, the US seems to be evaluating its relations with its Gulf allies. Oil may be of primary importance, but that's not the only US interest in West Asia.
We continue to have a multiplicity of interests as it relates to our bilateral relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And of course, a big piece of that is a security relationship, one that is important towards regional stability, but also approximately or more than 70,000 American citizens.
West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
We have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post, and it is very dear to my heart. After 10 years of war, we're going to get to the ground of Damascus, Qatar, Iran, and Iraq. But first, let's take a quick look at the headlines across West Asia.
Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid expresses deep concern over Russia and Iran's military ties in a conversation with Ukraine's foreign minister. Lapid emphasized that Israel stands with the Ukrainian people. 96-year-old Iranian dissident and cleric Ali Teherani, brother-in-law of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, has died in Tehran. He was a critic of the Islamic Republic and also opposes the monarchy led by US-backed Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah of Iran, expresses solidarity with Ukrainians who have suffered from Russian-fired drones, allegedly sold by Tehran. US denounces reconciliation between Syria and Hamas after a 10-year hiatus. Hamas sent a delegation to meet Syrian President Bashar al-Assad on Wednesday. Hamas had broken ties with Syria in 2012 after condemning Assad's suppression of protests. France has repatriated 40 children and 15 women from Kurdish-run camps in Syria that were holding family members of suspected ISIS fighters. The repatriation comes after a European rights court condemned France for refusing to return 2 women detained in Syria. Turkey assessed the allegations that its military used chemical weapons in its fight against outlawed Kurdish militants are completely unfounded and untrue.
We earlier spoke about the Gulf nations' dealings with Moscow, but the Gulf is not alone on this. Recently, Iran has been accused of supplying weapons to Russia. Ukraine accused Iran of helping the Russian war effort. Now, these are accusations that Tehran has denied. But in the next report, we take a closer look at these charges.
The Russia-Ukraine war has raged on for about 8 months. A war this long results in the depletion of a country's arms and ammunition. Reports say Russia has used up a large part of its weapons stockpile, but it continues to bombard Ukraine. How is Russia managing to do that for so long? Well, it has been accused of using Iranian drones. Reports say Iran is also selling missiles to Russia. First, let's look at the weapons Iran has been accused of supplying. It is suspected of supplying surface-to-surface Fateh 110 missiles to Russia. Iran possesses one of the largest arsenals of short and medium-range missiles in West Asia. Historically, Iranian weapons designers have struggled with reliability problems. However, experts say that the newest versions of the Fateh 110 are both potent and reasonably accurate. Let's take a closer look at the Fateh 110 missiles. With a shooting range of 200 to 500 kilometers, these missiles are well suited to take out targets from a large distance with high precision. The short-range ballistic missiles have a payload of around 500 kilograms and a launch weight of nearly 3,500. Then there are drones. Russia has been accused of using Iran's Shahed drones. These are kamikaze drones. This means they fly into military targets instead of dropping a payload. Russia allegedly launched dozens of these drones on Monday. The drones struck Ukraine's energy infrastructure and killed 4 people. The drone attacks have led to condemnation from Ukraine.
Iran supplies them drones, supplies them kills of Ukrainians. This is what they agreed on for money, this bloody money that Iran is earning.
Kyiv has downgraded its relationship with Tehran.
Tehran bears full responsibility for the destruction of relations with Ukraine. Considering the many destructions caused by Iranian-made drones to Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, the death and suffering caused to our people, and the new reports about Iran continuing to supply weapons to Russia, I am submitting to the President of Ukraine a proposition to sever diplomatic ties with Iran. We never took an anti-Iranian stance, but after Iran became part of aggressive crimes and Russian crimes on our territory, we're taking a definite and honest position.
Ukrainians protested outside the Iranian embassy in Kyiv. The US has already sanctioned Iranian drone makers. On Tuesday, Washington said it would make the sale of Iranian drones even harder.
We will continue to take practical, aggressive steps to make these weapons sales harder, including sanctions, export control actions against any entities involved. For instance, as you all know, in early September, we sanctioned several Iranian persons involved in the productions of UAVs and weapons, and we have extensive tools available at our arsenal to disrupt not just Iranian arms transfers, but also to continue to hold Russia accountable for their preposterous acts in Ukraine as well.
Russia has denied any knowledge of the use of Iranian drones. It says only Russian equipment is being used in Ukraine. Iran has also denied supplying equipment to Russia.
Unfortunately, the news that is published stems from political goals and largely is developed upon by Western media. Just as it has countlessly announced, the Islamic Republic of Iran is not on any side of the war between Russia and Ukraine. The Islamic Republic of Iran has not exported any weapon to any side of the war.
Despite the denials, the world believes Iran and Russia are working together. The reasons may be purely transactional. Russia needs weapons, Iran needs money. But the fact remains that the ties have put a large part of the world on edge. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Iraq elected a new president last week. He promptly put forward Mohammad Shia al-Sudani as Prime Minister-Designate. Now, who is al-Sudani, and will he be able to bring Iraq out of its political crisis? We take a closer look at who this man is.
Iraq has been suffering from political turmoil for about a year. A government failed to form after the elections last October, but the deadlock may break this week. The new president, Abdul Latif Jamal Rashid, put Mohammad Shia al-Sudani forward as the new PM designate. Al-Sudani has till the middle of next month to finalize his cabinet, but reports say it could happen as soon as Saturday.
I will do my best to form a strong government, adamant on the fulfillment of its goals, by nominating professional and honest personalities who are able to achieve their responsibilities. We will strive to hold free and fair local elections in a transparent electoral environment that will reassure all those vying for a spot.
But who is al-Sudani? How did he become the Prime Minister-elect? What challenges does he face? We'll first talk about al-Sudani's background. His father was executed by Saddam Hussein's regime when he was about 10 years old. In his early 20s, he joined the 1991 Shia uprising to try and topple Hussein. After Hussein was deposed by the US in 2003, al-Sudani took up various positions in local and central governments. In 2004, he became the mayor of Amara city. In 2009, he became the governor of the Maysan province. In 2010, he joined the cabinet of former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki. He served as Iraq's human rights minister till 2014. He then served as Minister of Labour and Social Reforms from 2014 to 2018. During that time, he was part of Iraq's Islamic Dawa party. But he quit in 2020. This was after protests against the al-Maliki regime. Al-Sudani is now the leader of the Euphrates Movement Party. It won 3 parliamentary seats in last year's elections. The party is part of the Coordination Framework, a group of iron-backed Shia parties. The Coordination Framework first proposed al-Sudani's name for the Prime Minister's post in July. His nomination had sparked protests in Baghdad. Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone was stormed by supporters of one of the biggest names in Iraq politics, Muqtada al-Sadr. Al-Sadr's party, the Sadr movement, had won the most seats in the 2021 elections. But they failed to ally with enough MPs to form the government. Al-Sadr withdrew his 73 MPs from parliament in June. He wanted fresh elections. But the coordination framework increased their numbers after al-Sadr withdrew his MPs. They took advantage of the situation by nominating al-Sudani in July and stand to benefit from his becoming prime minister now. Al-Sudani is viewed as a neutral candidate, but the Sadr movement has declared that they will not join his government. Some Sadr supporters hold posts in Iraq's government. Tension is expected between them and the new al-Sudani regime. Besides the political instability, Iraq faces other problems as well. $87 billion from oil exports are locked up in Iraq's central bank. Iraq's interim government did not have the authority to release a budget. The people expect the new government to use that money for Iraq's development. According to the UN, nearly 4 out of 10 young Iraqis are unemployed. About 1/3 of the country lives in poverty. Al-Sudani has vowed to revitalize Iraq's industry, agriculture and private sector. He also said he would end corruption. But Iraq's citizens aren't sure if the new regime will be able to deliver.
I consider the birth of this government a very difficult birth, but we hope, we can't but hope. We don't have anything but hope that hearts reconcile and that they learn the lesson from the protests. To be honest, we can say this is the last chance.
West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
As we all know, Qatar is preparing to receive over 1 million visitors for the FIFA World Cup. Now, the tourism industry in the country hopes to showcase a different side of Qatar to fans. In our next report, we take a look at what's going on in Qatar alongside the World Cup preparations. Let's see.
Qatar is hosting the 2022 Football World Cup. The tournament will take place from November 20th to December 18th. 32 nations are taking part. Matches are spread across 8 stadiums which are within 40 kilometers of Doha. The nation of about 2.8 million people is expecting 1.2 million visitors for the marquee event. Reports say that 2 million room nights have already been sold across various accommodations. The unprecedented number of tourists will need something to do in between matches. So Qatar's tourism industry hopes that fans get a chance to see what else the country has to offer. The country has been preparing a variety of areas to show tourists. First, of course, is the desert. The peninsula is almost entirely covered in sand dunes. The dunes are popular with tourists because of the magnificent views on offer. Qatar Tourism's CEO tells us about the country's desert safaris.
So obviously Qatar in the Middle East, we have lots of deserts, lots of sand. Sea Lion, which is the starting point for most of those tours, again, around about 45 to 50 minutes drive from the city center Doha. From there, camels will greet you at the beginning.
Along with the slow-paced scenic tours, Qatar's desert has something for thrill seekers as well: dune bashing. It's when cars are driven on the sand dunes, usually resulting in exhilarating experiences. Of course, Qatar isn't just desert. The peninsula juts into the Persian Gulf. It has about 700 square kilometers of coastline. Qatar's Al Thaqira mangroves forest has been prepared to receive tourists. From a human heritage perspective, Qatar is home to medieval monuments like the Al Zubara Fort. Then there's Qatar's Museum of Islamic Art. It reopened in early October after being closed for 18 months for a relaunch and reinstallation project. The museum houses a collection of Islamic art from around the world. The museum's director is certain that it will show football fans a different side of West Asia.
I think that's an ideal place to showcase the Islamic world from other perspectives than jihad and martyrs and war and problems, you see, because the Islamic world is very big, is beautiful, has an amazing history, and I think we just have the opportunity to showcase all of this.
And now there are new additions to Qatar's tourism industry: pandas. China has gifted 2 pandas to Qatar ahead of the World Cup. They arrived in Doha on Wednesday. They are part of the panda diplomacy China has been practicing since the 1950s. They will stay at the newly established panda house in Doha's Al Khor Park.
This is the first time in the Middle East that we're receiving pandas. This is really also the first time after COVID that pandas came again out of China. So it's a very, very special day.
The panda enclosure was built over 2 years. The construction adhered to strict guidelines to ensure that the pandas have a comfortable environment. These are some of the attractions that were timed to coincide with the World Cup. Qatar is the first nation in West Asia to host the Football World Cup. It's hoping to leave visitors with a good impression of the region. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
Over a decade of brutal war. But what is a decade for a city that is aged more than 7,000 years? I am talking about Damascus, the capital of Syria. According to historians, it is the oldest inhabited city in the world. So, in the segment we call Curiosities, where we bring you heartwarming stories from the region, we're gonna take a quick walk in the oldest town in the region. Let's go to Damascus. This door behind me is one of the 7 doors of Damascus. Its name is Bab Sharqi, or the Eastern Door. 7 of these doors are around the rounded city, one of the most peculiar cities in the world. If you want to take a look at Syria's history or the history of Damascus, this mosque is a great example. It started as an Aramic temple and then as a Roman temple. Later on in history, it became a church and then a mosque, a center for the Islamic world. To take a look at the very diverse culture in Syria, this can tell you just a little bit about this intertwined, historic, traditional country. As you can see, this very unique architecture has given the Syrian society some of its vibe. In Damascus, people live all together with doors that are shut inside. There are big gardens. That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a very interesting brand new lineup. Until then, stay safe. I'm Ghadi Francis, coming to you from Beirut, Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.